The orc woman standing watch at the Windrift toll station had learned long ago that the best time to exist among humans was when they were asleep. Lira Nordak preferred the night shift for precisely that reason. The deep hours between sunset and dawn brought fewer travelers, fewer eyes that widened at the sight of her green skin, fewer hands that twitched toward weapons when her tusks caught the lamplight. Most folk who passed through at this hour were too tired to stare, too focused on reaching the next village to do more than hand over their coins and hurry along. The arrangement suited her perfectly. She collected tolls, recorded wagon numbers in the ledger, and existed in a careful solitude that felt safer than hope. The toll station sat at the junction of two trade roads in the border country, a region too rural to boast anything grander than scattered homesteads and the occasional fortified farmstead. The station itself was a sturdy stone building with thick walls and narrow windows, built decades ago when these roads had needed defending. Now it served a quieter purpose, though the iron-banded door and the heavy crossbar still spoke of older, more dangerous times. Lira kept the place clean and functional. The small stable behind the main building housed her own sturdy pony and had room for perhaps 4 other horses if travelers needed overnight shelter. She had a cot in the back room, a wood stove that heated water for tea, and a life that asked nothing of her except competence. It was enough. It had to be enough. She was updating the ledger by lamplight when she heard the horse approaching, its gait uneven. Lira set down her pen and moved to the window, peering out into the autumn darkness. A single rider was coming up the north road, and even from a distance, she could see the horse favoring its left foreleg. The animal was limping badly, each step careful and pained. The rider dismounted before reaching the station, leading the horse the final 100 yards on foot. Lira watched him come into the circle of lamplight that spilled from her window. He was human, of course. Broad-shouldered but not especially tall, perhaps 5 feet and 10 inches, with dark hair that curled at his collar. He wore travel-stained clothes and carried saddlebags slung over one shoulder, the other hand gentle on his horse's reins. Lira opened the door before he could knock, stepping into the doorway but not beyond. She had learned that doorways were useful. They framed her, made her presence official rather than threatening. They gave humans a moment to adjust to the sight of her before she moved any closer. The man looked up and his face did something complicated. Not fear exactly. Surprise, certainly, but it smoothed into something else almost immediately. Interest, maybe. Curiosity. "Good evening," he said, and his voice was warm, the kind of voice that smiled even when his mouth did not. "I seem to have encountered some poor luck. My horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back, and the road has not been kind to his hoof. I do not suppose there is a farrier anywhere nearby." Lira kept her tone neutral, professional. "The nearest village is 6 miles south. There is a smithy there, but you would not reach it before midnight, and not at the pace your horse can manage now." The man nodded, glancing back at his limping mount with genuine concern. "I feared as much. The poor fellow has earned better treatment than I have given him today. Is there space in your stable where I might keep him for the night? I can pay for shelter and fodder, and I would not mind sleeping in the stable myself if that is what you have available." It was a reasonable request. The toll station did offer such services, though few travelers took advantage of them. Most preferred to push on to a proper inn. Lira hesitated, not because the request was unusual, but because something about this man made her wary in a way she could not name. He stood too comfortably in her presence. He had not yet looked away from her face. "There is stable room," she said finally, "and a spare cot inside if you prefer it, The cost is 2 silver for the night, including fodder and water for your horse. More than fair." He dug into his pocket and produced the coins without haggling, holding them out to her. Lira descended the 2 steps from the doorway and accepted the money. Her hand did not shake. She had trained herself out of that years ago. The man did not flinch when her fingers brushed his palm, and that alone was strange enough to unsettle her. She led him around to the stable, a squat building with 4 stalls and a hayloft above. Her pony, a placid gray creature named Stonehoof, barely lifted his head as they entered. Lira lit the lantern hanging by the door and gestured to the empty stalls. "Any of these will do. There is a water trough at the end and hay in the loft. If you need help with your horse, I can tend him." "I would appreciate that," the man said. He was already loosening the saddle straps, his movements practiced and efficient. "I am not much of a horseman, truth be told. I can ride well enough and I treat my animals with all the care I can muster, but the finer points of hoof care are beyond me. I am better with maps than horses." "Maps?" "I am a mapmaker by trade." He hefted the saddle off and set it carefully on the stall partition. "Bennett Fairley, at your service. I have spent the last month surveying the roads and landmarks in this region, updating old charts that have not been revised in a generation." "Fascinating work, though it does require a great deal of travel." Lira took the lantern and crouched beside the horse, running her hand down its foreleg until the animal lifted its hoof. The damage was not terrible, but it was not good either. The hoof wall was chipped, and a stone had left a tender bruise on the sole. She would need to clean it and apply a poultice to draw out any infection. "Your horse will be fine," she said, "but he should not be ridden for at least 2 days. The hoof needs time to heal." Bennett sighed, but it was not an annoyed sound. More rueful, as though he had expected this news and had already resigned himself to it. "Then I suppose I am staying longer than 1 night if you will have me. I can pay for the time, and I promise I am a quiet guest. I will not disturb your work." Lira glanced up at him. He was leaning against the stall door, watching her tend his horse with an expression of calm attentiveness. There was no impatience in him, no irritation at the delay. He simply looked interested in what she was doing, as though watching an orc woman treat a horse hoof was the most natural thing in the world. "2 more nights, then," she said. "The same rate per night. I will see to your horse's hoof. There is a cot inside the main building, and I can provide you with stew if you are hungry." "I am, actually. I have been on the road since dawn and my rations are uninspiring at best." He smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Lira Nordak." "I am fortunate to have found this place." She blinked. "I did not tell you my name. It is written on the sign above the door, Windrift Toll Station, operated by L. Nordak. I made an educated guess." His smile widened a fraction. "Was I correct?" "You were." She turned her attention back to the horse, unnerved by how pleased he seemed with himself. Humans did not usually bother learning her name. They paid their tolls, avoided her gaze, and moved on. She finished cleaning the hoof and applied a poultice of herbs and clay that she kept on hand for such occasions. The horse bore the treatment patiently, and Bennett murmured soothing nonsense to the animal while she worked. When she was done, she filled the water trough and climbed the ladder to the loft, tossing down fresh hay for both horses. Bennett insisted on spreading the hay himself, and Lira did not argue. She led him back to the main building and showed him where he could wash his hands, then ladled out 2 bowls of the rabbit stew she had made that morning. It was simple fare, nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. She set his bowl on the small table near the wood stove and retreated to her desk with her own. He did not retreat with her. Bennett sat at the table, ate 3 spoonfuls of stew, and said, "This is excellent. I have not had a meal this good in weeks. What is the herb you used? It has a brightness to it that I cannot quite place. Lira kept her eyes on her ledger. Wild thyme. It grows near the creek. Ah, I shall have to remember that. I am a miserable cook, but I keep trying to improve. Mostly I fail, but every now and then I manage something edible. He paused, taking another bite. Do you forage often, or do you keep a garden? Both. Practical. I imagine supplies are difficult to come by out here. I manage. She thought that would be the end of it. Most people took her short answers as the dismissal they were meant to be. But Bennett simply nodded, finished his stew in companionable silence, and then said, May I ask what you do to pass the time during the night shifts? It must be lonely work. Lira set down her pen and finally looked at him. He was watching her with that same calm interest, his expression open and curious. There was no pity in it, no condescension, just genuine curiosity, as though he truly wanted to know. I raid, she said, and I keep the accounts. There is always something that needs mending or cleaning. The time passes. You enjoy raiding? Yes. What sort of books? She hesitated. This was far more conversation than she typically had with travelers, and she was not certain why she was indulging it. Perhaps because he seemed harmless. Perhaps because the alternative was telling him to be quiet, and that felt needlessly rude when he had been nothing but courteous. Histories, she said. Herbals. Sometimes poetry, though I am not good at understanding it. Poetry is difficult, Bennett agreed. I think it is meant to be felt rather than understood, but that is no help when you are sitting there wondering what the poet actually meant by comparing love to a river or a storm or what have you. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed. I prefer maps myself. They are honest. A river is a river, a road is a road. Everything is exactly where it claims to be. That must be comforting. It is, he grinned. Though I will admit that maps can lie too in their way. Old maps especially. Borders shift, rivers change course, roads fall into disuse. That is why I do what I do. Someone has to keep the records accurate. Lira found herself almost smiling, though she caught it before it fully formed. There was something engaging about the way he spoke, a lightness that was not frivolous but not heavy either. He talked the way some people hummed while they worked, as though conversation were simply a natural extension of being alive. Tell me, Bennett said, leaning forward slightly, how did you come to run this toll station? It seems an unusual occupation. And there it was. The question she had been waiting for. Lira looked down at her ledger, her jaw tightening. The previous operator retired, she said. The regional magistrate needed someone reliable to take over. I applied and I was hired. Simple as that, simple as that. It was not simple, of course. It had taken weeks of proving herself, of enduring the magistrate's doubt and the whispered conversations about whether an orc could be trusted with such responsibility. It had required letters of reference from the few humans who had employed her over the years, all of them carefully worded to emphasize her competence and downplay her nature. It had required her to accept wages lower than a human would have earned, and to work hours that no human wanted. But she had done it, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was wandering, scraping by on odd jobs, sleeping in barns or under hedges, always moving because nowhere wanted her to stay. Bennett seemed to sense that there was more to the story, but he did not press. Instead he said, Well, I am glad you are here. I would have been in a miserable situation without this station. You would have reached the village eventually. True, but my horse would have suffered for it, and I would have spent a cold night sleeping under a tree. This is far better. He stood and carried his empty bowl to the wash basin, cleaning it without being asked. I should let you return to your work. Thank you for the meal and for tending my horse. If you need anything during the night, I am a light sleeper. Just knock. He took himself off to the small side room where the spare cot was kept, and Lira was left alone with her ledger and the soft crackle of the wood stove. She tried to focus on her entries, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation. It had been strange, not unpleasant, but strange. She was not accustomed to humans who asked her questions, who looked at her without flinching, who treated her presence as ordinary. She told herself not to think too much of it. Bennett was a traveler, stranded by circumstance. He would be gone in 2 days, 3 at most, and she would return to her routine. The night shift, the solitude, the careful distance she kept between herself and the rest of the world. It was enough. It had to be enough. The next day began with pale autumn sunlight filtering through the narrow windows. Lira woke early, as she always did, and set about her morning tasks. She checked on the horses, pleased to see that the poultice had done its work and the swelling in Bennett's horse's hoof had gone down. She changed the dressing and made a note to check again in the evening. Then she fed Stonehoof, mucked out the stalls, and hauled water from the well. When she returned to the main building, Bennett was awake and attempting to make tea. He had found her kettle and her small store of herbs, and he was peering into the various jars with an expression of intense concentration. "Good morning," he said when she entered. "I was trying to determine which of these is tea and which is something that will poison me. I am leaning toward this one, but I am not confident." Lira crossed the room and took the jar from his hand. "That is feverfew for headaches. The tea is here." She handed him the correct jar, a mixture of dried mint and chamomile that she had gathered herself. "Ah, thank you. I would have been very surprised to discover I had poisoned myself before breakfast." He set the kettle on the stove to heat. "How is my horse this morning?" "Better. The swelling is reduced. He should be able to travel in another day, but I would recommend 2 to be safe." "2 it is, then." Bennett did not seem troubled by the delay. If anything, he seemed content. "That gives me time to update my maps of this area. There are several landmarks nearby that I need to verify. A creek, I think, and a set of old boundary stones. Would you mind if I explored the area a bit? Do as you like." "The land around the station is common ground." "Excellent. Would you care to join me? I imagine you know the area better than anyone, and I would value your insight." Lira stared at him. "You want me to accompany you, if you are willing." "I find that local knowledge is invaluable for accurate map-making. Besides, it is a fine day and I could use the company." He poured hot water over the tea leaves, the steam rising in fragrant curls. "But if you prefer not to, I understand. I do not wish to impose." She should say no. She should make some excuse about needing to stay at the station, about having work to do. But the truth was that traffic was light this time of year, and the station could manage without her for a few hours. And there was something in the way he asked, casual and undemanding, that made refusal seem churlish. "I will come," she said, "but only for a few hours. I need to be back by midday." "Perfect." They set out an hour later, after Lira had finished her morning chores and Bennett had gathered his surveying tools. He carried a leather satchel filled with papers, a compass, a measuring cord, and a collection of charcoal sticks for sketching. Lira led him east toward the creek, following a narrow trail that wound through a forest of oak and ash. The leaves were turning, bright golds and reds against the pale sky, and the air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Bennett talked as they walked, a steady stream of observations and questions. He pointed out features of the landscape, asked about the names of hills and streams, and made notes in a small leather-bound journal. His enthusiasm was infectious. He treated the work as though it were an adventure, each new landmark a discovery worth celebrating. "There," Lira said, pointing to a cluster of moss-covered stones half hidden by undergrowth. "Those are the old boundary markers. They date back to when this land was disputed territory between two baronies. The conflict was settled decades ago, but the stones remain. Bennett crouched beside the stones, brushing away leaves and dirt to reveal faint carvings. Remarkable. Look at this, the symbols are still visible. This one is a wolf and this one is a tower. Do you know which barony each represented? The wolf was Greymark. The tower was Caulfield. Neither exists anymore. The land was absorbed into the crown holdings after the old barons died without heirs. Fascinating. He sketched the stones in his journal, his hand quick and sure. History written in stone, quite literally. I love this work. Every map is a story if you know how to read it. They continued to the creek, a swift running stream that cut through the forest in a series of gentle curves. Bennett took measurements, noting the width and depth, the direction of the current. Lira watched him work, impressed despite herself by his focus and precision. He was good at this, she realized, not just competent but genuinely skilled. His maps would be accurate because he cared enough to make them so. Why map making? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Bennett looked up from his notes, a smile tugging at his lips. Ah, now there is a question. Honestly, because I was terrible at everything else. My father wanted me to be a merchant, but I have no head for numbers. My mother thought I should be a scholar, but I am far too restless to spend my days in a library. I tried my hand at farming, at carpentry, at a dozen other trades, and I was mediocre at all of them. But maps made sense. They are about observation, about paying attention to the world around you. That I can do. You do it well. Thank you. He sounded genuinely pleased. It is a good life, even if it means I spend most of my time on the road. I meet interesting people, see new places. I cannot complain. They walked back to the station in companionable silence, the sun climbing higher as they went. Lira found herself relaxing in his presence, the constant tension she carried when around humans easing just slightly. Bennett did not seem to notice her tusks or her green skin or the way her ears tapered to points. He simply treated her as though she were another person, worthy of conversation and courtesy. It was strange. It was unsettling. It was dangerously close to pleasant. That evening, after the day's shift had ended and Lira had resumed her post, Bennett appeared in the doorway of the main room with a battered deck of cards. "Do you play?" he asked, holding up the deck. Lira glanced up from her ledger. "Play what? Cards. Any number of games, really. I know at least a dozen, ranging from the very simple to the unnecessarily complicated. I thought you might enjoy a distraction." She should say no. She should return to her ledger, her solitude, the safe distance she kept between herself and everyone else. But the truth was that the ledger was finished and the night stretched long and empty ahead of her. "I know a few games," she said. Bennett grinned and pulled a chair up to her desk. "Excellent. Let us start with something simple. Do you know Kingdoms?" They played for hours, the cards slapping against the wooden desk, the lamplight flickering as the night deepened. Bennett was good at cards, but not so good that Lira could not keep up. He won some hands, she won others, and they traded small wagers of copper coins and chores. By the time midnight came and went, Lira had won the dubious privilege of making Bennett muck out the stable the next morning, and Bennett had won the right to demand that Lira teach him how to make her rabbit stew. "It is a fair trade," Bennett said, shuffling the cards for another round. "I get a useful skill and you get to avoid shoveling horse manure. Everyone wins." Lira felt the smile tug at her lips before she could stop it, and this time she did not try to hide it. "You are very pleased with yourself." "I am. It is one of my finer qualities." "Is that what you call it?" "I do. Confidence, charm, and unshakable belief in my own brilliance. These are the traits that have carried me through life." He dealt the cards with a flourish, his eyes bright with humor. Also stubbornness. I am extraordinarily stubborn, ask anyone. I believe you. They played another hand, and then another, and the hours slipped away like water. Lira could not remember the last time she had enjoyed herself so thoroughly. Bennett had a way of making everything feel easy, as though laughter and conversation were the most natural things in the world. He teased her gently when she won, groaned dramatically when he lost, and told stories about his travels that were equal parts absurd and entertaining. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Lira felt as though she had known him far longer than 2 days. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Familiarity bred expectation, and expectation led to disappointment. But she could not quite bring herself to care. Not yet. Not while he was still here, still smiling at her across the desk, still treating her as though she mattered. The third day came and went, and Bennett's horse was declared fit to travel. Lira checked the hoof one final time, satisfied that the healing was complete. Bennett saddled the animal himself, though he moved slowly as though reluctant to finish the task. "Well," he said, adjusting the stirrups with unnecessary care, "I suppose this is farewell. Thank you for your hospitality, Lira. You have been a gracious host, and I am grateful." Lira nodded, her throat tight. "Safe travels." He swung into the saddle, then paused, looking down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "This road is on my survey route," he said. "I will likely pass through again in a few weeks, if that is acceptable to you. It is a public road, true, but I am not asking about the road. I am asking about you." Lira met his gaze, her heart beating uncomfortably fast. "You may pass through whenever you like." "Good." He smiled, that warm, open smile that seemed to come so easily to him. "Then I will see you again soon." He rode away, and Lira watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she returned to the station, to her ledger and her solitude, and tried to convince herself that his departure did not matter, that the sudden emptiness of the place was simply her imagination, that she had not, in the space of 3 days, grown dangerously accustomed to his presence. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Lira kept to her routine, tending the station, collecting tolls, existing in the careful solitude she had built around herself. But something had shifted. The silence felt heavier now, more oppressive. She caught herself listening for the sound of hoofbeats on the road, for a voice that smiled even when the mouth did not. She told herself she was being foolish. Bennett had been a traveler, nothing more. A pleasant distraction, a brief interruption in the steady rhythm of her life. He would not return, or if he did, it would be in the impersonal way of all travelers, a brief stop to pay his toll before moving on. But he did return. It was late afternoon when he rode up to the station, his horse moving at an easy canter. Lira was hauling water from the well, and she nearly dropped the bucket when she saw him. Bennett dismounted and led his horse to the stable, calling out a greeting as he passed. "Good afternoon, Lira. I hope you do not mind another visit. I have been surveying the western roads, and this seemed the most logical place to stop for the night." Lira set down the bucket, her hands trembling slightly. "The western roads are 10 miles in the other direction." "Are they? How careless of me. I must have misread my map." His tone was perfectly innocent, but his eyes were laughing. She wanted to be annoyed. She wanted to tell him that she saw through his transparent excuse, that she knew he had gone out of his way to come here. But the truth was that she was glad to see him, desperately, dangerously glad, and she could not quite bring herself to scold him for it. "The stable is open," she said. "The usual rate applies, of course." He stayed 2 nights that time, and when he left he promised to return in another 2 weeks. And he did. and then again and again until his visits became a pattern she could rely on. Every 2 weeks, sometimes 3, Bennett would appear on the road to Windrift, his saddlebags full of new maps and his pockets full of stories. He would stay a night or two, sometimes longer if he could justify it, and they would talk and play cards and cook meals together in the small warmth of the station. Lira knew what was happening. She was not a fool. She was falling for him, falling in a way that terrified her because it felt inevitable and impossible all at once. Bennett was kind and funny and clever, and he looked at her as though she were someone worth knowing. He brought her small gifts from his travels, nothing extravagant, just things he thought she might like. A book of poetry from a village market, a bundle of rare herbs he had found growing near a river, a set of colored pencils because he had noticed her sketching in the margins of her ledger. He was courting her. The realization came slowly, creeping up on her over the course of weeks until it was undeniable. Bennett was courting her, and she did not know what to do with that knowledge. It felt like holding something fragile and impossibly precious, something that would shatter if she gripped it too tightly or let it slip through her fingers. Winter arrived, and with it came the first snow. Bennett's visits became less frequent, the roads more treacherous. But he still came, bundled in a heavy cloak, his horse's breath misting in the cold air. Lira kept the wood stove burning hot and made thick stews to warm him, and they spent long evenings together in the golden circle of lamplight. It was during one of those evenings, deep in the heart of winter, that Lira finally allowed herself to believe. Bennett had been telling her a story about a village he had mapped, a place where the locals insisted a ghost haunted the old mill. He was animated, gesturing with his hands, his voice full of affection for the people he had met. And then he stopped mid-sentence and looked at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Lira," he said, "I need to tell you something." Her heart clenched. This was it, she thought. This was the moment when he would tell her that he could not keep visiting, that his work was taking him elsewhere, that he had enjoyed their time together, but it had to end. She braced herself, her hands curling into fists beneath the table. "I have been routing my work to pass through this area," he said. "You probably guessed that already. I could survey a dozen other regions, map roads in places I have never been, but I keep coming back here. Do you know why?" She could not speak, could not breathe. She shook her head mutely. "Because of you," Bennett said simply. "I come back because every time I leave, I spend the next 2 weeks thinking about when I can see you again. I plan my routes around this station, around the chance to sit with you and talk, to see you smile, to hear you laugh when you think I am not paying attention. I am not very good at subtlety, Lira, and I am tired of pretending this is coincidence. I care for you, deeply. And I would like to know if you feel the same." Lira stared at him, her mind a chaos of disbelief and hope and terror. "You cannot mean that." "I do. You are human. I am an orc. People do not, we do not. I know what people think. I know what they say, but I am not asking people. I am asking you." He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Do you care for me, Lira?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to protect herself, to pull away before this went any further, before the inevitable happened and he realized that loving an orc was too difficult, too strange, too much to bear. But the words would not come, because the truth was that she did care for him. She cared for him so much it frightened her, so much that the thought of losing him felt like losing a part of herself. "Yes," she whispered. "I care for you, but Bennett, this cannot work. You will change your mind. You will realize that I am not worth the trouble, that the stares and the whispers and the judgment are too much. You will leave, and I do not think I could bear that. I will not leave." His voice was firm, utterly certain. "Lira, I have spent my entire life drifting from place to place, never quite belonging anywhere. And then I met you, and for the first time I felt like I had found something worth staying for. You are not trouble. You are not a burden. You are the person I choose every single day over every other option available to me. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and unexpected. How can you be sure? Because I know my own heart. He squeezed her hand gently. I am not a fickle man, Lira. When I commit to something, I see it through. And I am committed to this, to you, for as long as you will have me. She let the tears fall, too overwhelmed to stop them. Bennett rose from his chair and came around the table, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder and held on tightly, as though she could anchor him there through sheer force of will. I am afraid, she admitted, her voice muffled against his shirt. I know, but you do not have to be afraid alone. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other while the snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the stove. And for the first time in years, Lira allowed herself to hope. But hope, she would learn, was a fragile thing. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Lira's life. Bennett came to the station more often now, his visits stretching from 2 nights to 4, then to a full week. He brought his work with him, spreading maps across her desk and asking her opinion on routes and landmarks. They cooked together, rode together, and on clear nights they walked the frost-rimed roads under a sky full of stars. Lira began to believe that it was real. That Bennett truly meant what he said, that he was choosing her not out of pity or curiosity, but because he genuinely loved her. The word love had not been spoken aloud yet, but it hung between them like a promise, waiting for the right moment. But belief was a fragile thing, and doubt had deep roots. It started small. A merchant passing through the toll station who stared at Bennett with open confusion when he emerged from the stable, laughing at something Lira had said. A woman traveling with her children who pulled them close when Lira approached to collect the toll, her eyes flicking nervously between the orc and the human man who stood beside her. A group of soldiers who made pointed comments about the strangeness of seeing a human so comfortable in an orc's presence, their laughter edged with something ugly. Bennett ignored them all, his manner easy and unbothered. But Lira could not ignore them. Each stare, each whispered comment, each moment of judgment felt like a stone added to a weight she was already struggling to carry. She began to wonder if Bennett truly understood what he was signing up for. If he realized that being with her meant facing that judgment not just occasionally, but constantly. For the rest of his life. The breaking point came on a cold morning in early spring. Bennett had been at the station for nearly a week, the longest he had ever stayed. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, a domestic partnership that felt natural and right. But that morning, a nobleman traveling with an armed escort stopped to pay the toll. He looked at Lira, then at Bennett, and his lip curled in disgust. "You there," he said to Bennett, his voice sharp. "Are you a prisoner here? Is this creature holding you against your will?" Bennett straightened, his expression cooling. "I am no prisoner, this is my choice." The nobleman's disgust deepened. "Then you are a fool, or worse. Consorting with an orc is unnatural, shameful. You debase yourself and your kind." "I think," Bennett said, his voice dangerously calm, "that you should pay your toll and move along. My choices are none of your concern." The nobleman tossed a few coins onto the ground, forcing Lira to bend and pick them up from the dirt. Then he spurred his horse forward, his guards following, their laughter ringing in the cold air. Bennett turned to Lira, his face flushed with anger. "Lira, I am sorry. That man was an ignorant, it does not matter." Lira's voice was flat, emotionless. She dusted off the coins and added them to the lockbox, her hands steady. "It does matter. What he said was vile. It is what people think. It is what they will always think. She looked at him, her chest tight. You cannot fight every person who judges us, Bennett. There are too many of them. I do not care how many there are. I will not stand by and let people treat you that way. And what happens when you grow tired of fighting? When you realize that defending me is exhausting, that it would be easier to simply walk away? Her voice broke, the fear she had been suppressing finally spilling over. What happens when you leave, Bennett? I will not leave. You say that now. But you do not know what it will be like. You do not know what it costs to love someone like me. Bennett stepped toward her, his hands reaching for hers, but Lira pulled away. She could not bear to be touched, not when she felt this raw, this exposed. You should go, she said. Finish your work elsewhere. Find someone who will not complicate your life. Lira, I mean it, Bennett. This was a mistake. I should never have let it go this far. She turned and walked away, retreating to the stable where she could be alone. She heard him call after her, but she did not stop. She could not. If she stopped, if she let him argue, she would break, and she could not afford to break. She had to be strong. She had to protect herself, even if it meant pushing away the one person who made her feel whole. Bennett left that afternoon. Lira watched from the window as he saddled his horse, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked back at the station, his face drawn, and for a moment she thought he would come back inside. But he did not. He mounted his horse and rode away, and Lira was alone again. The days that followed were bleak. Lira threw herself into her work, scrubbing the station until it gleamed, reorganizing her supplies, mending every piece of tack in the stable. She worked until her hands ached and her body begged for rest, because if she stopped, if she let herself think, the pain would overwhelm her. She told herself she had done the right thing, that pushing Bennett away was an act of mercy, sparing him a lifetime of judgment and difficulty. But the lie tasted bitter, and she could not quite make herself believe it. 2 weeks passed, and then 3. Lira counted the days without meaning to, her traitorous heart still expecting his return even as her mind insisted he was gone for good. She had driven him away. She had made her choice. But Bennett, it turned out, was a stubborn man. He arrived on a gray afternoon in mid-spring, the roads muddy with melting snow and the air thick with the promise of rain. Lira heard the hoofbeats and her heart lurched, hope and fear warring in her chest. She forced herself to stay at her desk, her hands gripping the edge until her knuckles turned pale. The door opened. Bennett stepped inside, and he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes and his clothes were travel-worn, but his gaze was steady. "Lira," he said. She could not speak. Could not move. "I have been gone for 3 weeks," Bennett said. "I have mapped roads I have no interest in, slept in inns that smelled of mildew and despair, and eaten food that made me long for your rabbit stew. And the entire time, I have been thinking about what you said. About how I do not know what it costs to love you." "Bennett, please, you were right," he said, cutting her off gently. "I did not fully understand. I did not realize how much judgment we would face, how many people would look at us and see something wrong. But Lira, I understand now. And I am still here." She shook her head, tears welling. "You should not be. You should have stayed away." "Why? Because it is difficult. Because people will stare and whisper and make ignorant comments." He crossed the room, standing before her desk, his gaze unwavering. "Lira, I have spent my entire life looking for something that mattered, something worth dedicating myself to. And I found it. I found you. Do you truly think I would walk away from that because some nobleman thinks he has the right to judge me? It will not just be one nobleman. It will be everyone, every day, for the rest of your life. Then so be it." His voice was fierce, absolute. "I would rather face a lifetime of judgment with you than a single day of comfort without you. Do you understand that? I am not here because this is easy. I am here because I love you. And I am choosing you, Lira, forever." The word hung in the air, bright and undeniable. Forever. Lira stood, her legs unsteady. "You love me." "I do. I have for months. I should have said it sooner, but I was waiting for the right moment. And then I realized there is no perfect moment. There is just this. You and me and the choice we make." She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately it hurt, but the fear was still there, a cold knot in her chest. "What if you change your mind?" she whispered. "I will not." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I know what I want. And I want this. I want you." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "Lira, I am not asking you to stop being afraid. I am just asking you to let me be afraid with you. Let me prove that I mean this. Let me stay." She looked down at their joined hands, his fingers warm against her skin. And she thought about the weeks he had been gone, the hollow ache that had filled her chest, the way the station had felt empty without him. She thought about the laughter they had shared, the quiet evenings, the way he looked at her as though she were something precious. And she thought about the choice he was offering her. Not a promise that everything would be easy, but a promise that he would be there, that he would stay. "I am terrified," she said, "I know. I do not know how to do this, neither do I, but we can figure it out together." She took a shaky breath and then she nodded. "All right, stay." Bennett's face broke into a smile, bright and relieved, and he pulled her into his arms. She held him tightly, her face pressed against his shoulder, and let herself believe. Not because the fear was gone, but because the love was stronger. The spring passed into summer, and Bennett kept his promise. He stayed. He did not abandon his work, but he restructured it, focusing his surveys on the region around Windrift so he did not have to travel far. He brought his tools and maps to the station and set up a small workspace in the corner, his presence a constant, comforting fixture in Lira's life. They fell into a rhythm that felt less like cohabitation and more like partnership, each supporting the other in ways both large and small. Bennett took over the morning chores, mucking out the stable and hauling water while Lira slept after her night shifts. Lira taught him to cook properly, her patient instruction transforming his culinary efforts from barely edible to genuinely good. They worked side by side, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the profound, and Lira found herself laughing more than she had in years. There were difficulties, of course. Travelers still stared, still made comments. A peddler refused to sell them goods, claiming he would not trade with an orc. A family passing through asked Bennett if he needed help, clearly assuming Lira was threatening him. Each incident stung, but Bennett faced them with a calm, unshakable resolve. He did not argue or shout. He simply made it clear in word and deed that Lira was his partner, and anyone who could not accept that was not welcome. And slowly, Lira began to believe him. Not just in the abstract, but in the deep, bone-certain way that came from watching someone prove themselves day after day. Bennett did not leave when things were hard. He did not flinch when people judged them. He stayed, steady and sure, and his presence became the foundation on which she rebuilt her trust. Summer turned to autumn, and one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, Bennett said, "I have been thinking." Lira glanced at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "That sounds dangerous." "It is, very dangerous." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. "I have been thinking that I do not want to keep living out of saddlebags. I want a home, a real home with you." Her heart stuttered. "You have a home, you are here." "I know, but this is your home, Lira. The station is yours. I want to build something that is ours, together." "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his expression serious but hopeful. "I want to expand the station. Turn it into a proper way station, a place where travelers can find shelter and a hot meal. We could build an addition, Add more rooms, a larger stable. Make it a place that feels welcoming, not just functional. I have saved money from my work and I can keep surveying to bring in income. But I want to do this with you. I want to build a life with you. Lira stared at him, overwhelmed. You want to stay here, permanently? I do, if you will have me. She thought about what he was offering, not just his presence but his future. A commitment that went beyond words, beyond promises. He was asking her to build something with him, to create a life that was theirs alone. Yes, she said, her voice steady. I will have you. Bennett's grin was incandescent. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of promise and hope, and Lira let herself fall into it without reservation. They began work on the expansion that autumn. Bennett hired a builder from the nearest village, a gruff man named Osric, who raised an eyebrow at the sight of Lira, but kept his opinions to himself. The addition took shape slowly. A new wing that connected to the main building and housed 4 small guest rooms and a larger common area. They added a second story to the stable, creating a loft that could store supplies and, eventually, serve as extra living space if needed. Lira threw herself into the work, her hands as capable with hammer and nails as they were with reins and ledger books. Bennett worked beside her, his enthusiasm undimmed even when the work was backbreaking. They labored through the autumn and into the winter, the structure growing day by day until it stood complete, a testament to their shared vision. By the time the first snows fell, the way station was finished. It was simple but sturdy, the kind of place that promised warmth and safety to weary travelers. Bennett painted a sign and hung it above the door, Windrift Way Station, operated by Lira Nordak and Bennett Fairley. Lira stood before the sign, her throat tight with emotion. It is real, she said softly. It is. Bennett wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. And it is ours. They opened the way station in early winter, advertising it in the villages and towns within a day's travel. The response was slow at first, travelers wary of stopping at a place run by an orc. But those who did stop found clean rooms, hot food, and hosts who treated them with courtesy and competence. Word spread, and within a few months the way station had become a regular stop for traders and travelers moving through the region. Lira was astonished by the change. She had spent so many years hiding in the dark, convinced that no one would ever see her as anything other than a monster. But here, in the daylight, she stood behind the counter of her own establishment and greeted travelers without flinching. Some still stared, some still muttered. But others simply nodded, paid for their rooms and settled in without comment. It was not acceptance, not entirely, but it was a start. And Bennett was always there, his presence a steady anchor. He charmed the guests, told stories over dinner, and made the way station feel less like a business and more like a home. Lira watched him work, her heart full, and marveled at how much her life had changed. Spring arrived, and with it came a surprise. One morning, as Lira was sweeping the common room, Bennett appeared in the doorway with a small velvet pouch in his hand. He looked nervous, his usual confidence tempered by something deeper. "Lira," he said, "can we talk?" She set down the broom, her heart beginning to race. "Of course." He led her outside, into the soft spring morning. The world was waking up, green shoots pushing through the last patches of snow, and the air smelled of earth and growing things. Bennett took her hand and led her to the bench they had built beneath the old oak tree near the station. "I have something for you," he said, sitting beside her. "Or rather, I have a question." Lira's breath caught. She thought she knew what was coming, but she hardly dared to believe it. Bennett opened the velvet pouch and drew out a ring. It was simple, a band of silver with a small green stone set into it. "This stone is jade," he said. "I found it near the creek where we walked on my first visit. I had it set by a jeweler in the village. It is not much, but I thought I hoped he looked at her, his eyes bright with emotion. Lira, I love you. I have loved you since the night we played cards and you smiled at me like I had said something clever. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this place, making a home together. Will you marry me? Lira's vision blurred with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Bennett, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and then he kissed her, and the world felt impossibly bright and full of promise. They sat together beneath the oak tree, wrapped in each other's arms, and Lira let herself feel the joy without reservation. She had been so certain that humans could never love her, that she was destined for solitude. But Bennett had proven her wrong. He had chosen her, not once, but every single day. And now he was choosing her forever. They were married that summer, in a quiet ceremony at the way station. There was no grand celebration, no crowd of witnesses. Just the two of them, Osric the builder serving as a witness, and the local magistrate who had hired Lira all those years ago performing the rites. The magistrate had been skeptical at first, but he had seen the way station thrive under their joint stewardship, and he gave his blessing without hesitation. Lira wore a simple green dress, the color of new leaves, and Bennett wore his best traveling clothes. They spoke their vows beneath the oak tree, promising to love and support each other through whatever came. And when the magistrate pronounced them married, Bennett kissed her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. The years that followed were good. Not easy, but good. The way station flourished, becoming a fixture in the region. Travelers came to rely on the warm welcome and the excellent food, and Lira found herself building relationships with people she had once feared. There were still those who could not accept her, still those who saw only her green skin and her tusks and refused to see anything else. But they were fewer now, and their voices mattered less. Bennett continued his map-making, though he rarely traveled more than a day's ride from the way station. His maps became sought after for their accuracy and detail, and he built a reputation as one of the finest cartographers in the region. He was proud of his work, but Lira knew that his greatest pride was in what they had built together. 2 years after their marriage, Lira gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, and Bennett stayed by her side the entire time, his hand clasped in hers. When the baby finally arrived, wailing and red-faced, Lira held her and wept with exhaustion and relief. The baby was small and perfect, her skin a pale olive green, a blending of both her parents. She had Lira's pointed ears and Bennett's dark hair, and when she opened her eyes they were a bright, clear hazel. They named her Ina after Bennett's grandmother, a woman he had loved dearly. Ina grew up in the way station, surrounded by travelers and stories and the quiet, steady love of her parents. She was a bright, curious child, full of questions and laughter. Lira watched her daughter play in the courtyard, chasing chickens and helping in the stable, and felt a fierce, protective love that sometimes overwhelmed her. There were challenges, of course. Some travelers were unsettled by the sight of a half-orc child, and there were whispered conversations that Lira was not meant to hear. But Bennett faced each challenge with the same calm resolve he always had. He made it clear that Ina was their daughter, loved and cherished, and anyone who could not accept that was not welcome in their home. Ina herself seemed untroubled by the stares and whispers. She had inherited her father's easy confidence and her mother's quiet strength, and she moved through the world with a self-assurance that Lira envied. She made friends with the children of travelers, trading stories and games, and she learned to read and write from the books Bennett brought home. As the years passed, the way station became more than just a business. It became a symbol, a proof that different kinds of people could live and work together. Other orc families, emboldened by Lira's example, began to settle in the region. They took up trades and crafts, contributing to the community, and slowly the prejudice that had once been so absolute began to soften. It was not a perfect world. There were still those who hated, still those who feared. But there were also those who chose kindness, who chose to see the person rather than the race. And in those choices, there was hope. One evening, when Anna was 5 years old, Lira stood in the courtyard of the way station and watched the sunset. Travelers were settling in for the night, their horses stabled and their rooms prepared. The common room glowed with lamplight, and she could hear the murmur of conversation and the clatter of dishes. Bennett came to stand beside her, Anna perched on his shoulders. The little girl was laughing at something her father had said, her hazel eyes bright with joy. "Look at what we built," Bennett said softly, his gaze sweeping over the way station. Lira looked and she saw it. The sturdy buildings, the well-tended grounds, the people who came and went in safety and comfort. She saw the life they had created, built on love and stubbornness and the willingness to choose each other every single day. "It is good," she said. "It is better than good." Bennett shifted Anna on his shoulders, his hand reaching for Lira's. "It is everything." Anna piped up, her voice high and clear. "Mama, Papa, can we have honey cakes for dessert?" Bennett laughed. "I think that can be arranged." They went inside together, into the warmth and the light, and Lira felt a contentment that ran deeper than words. She had thought humans could never love her, that she was destined to live in the shadows, alone and unloved. But Bennett had proven her wrong. He had chosen her, not because it was easy, but because it was right, because he loved her, and in that love she had found not just a partner, but a family, a home, a future. The way station thrived for years, becoming a landmark in its own right. Maps began to mark it not just as a toll station, but as Fairley's Way Station, a place known for its hospitality and the unusual but respected couple who ran it. Travelers would detour to stop there, not just for the excellent food and comfortable beds, but to see for themselves the orc woman and the human man who had built something extraordinary together. Anna grew into a capable young woman, as comfortable greeting guests as she was helping her father update his maps or working alongside her mother in the kitchen. She had her father's charm and her mother's practical wisdom, and she navigated the world with a confidence that came from being raised in love rather than fear. When Anna was 10, a second child arrived, a son they named Rowan. He had more human features than his sister, though his skin held the same olive-green tint and his ears came to gentle points. Where Anna was outgoing and bold, Rowan was thoughtful and observant, content to spend hours watching his father work on maps or helping his mother tend the herb garden. The family expanded the way station again, adding a larger kitchen and a proper dining hall that could seat 20 travelers comfortably. They hired help from the village, young people who were happy to work for fair wages and who treated Lira with the same respect they showed Bennett. The way station became not just a business but a community hub, a place where locals and travelers alike could gather. There were still difficult moments. A group of soldiers once caused trouble, making crude comments about Lira and refusing to leave when asked. Bennett handled it calmly but firmly, and when they would not go, he fetched the magistrate himself. The soldiers were fined and banned from the way station, and word spread that Lira and Bennett would not tolerate disrespect in their establishment, but those moments were increasingly rare. The way station's reputation grew, and with it came a grudging acceptance from those who had once been hostile. People began to see Lira not as an orc first, but as a person, a capable businesswoman, a devoted mother, a member of the community who contributed more than she took. Years passed. Inag grew up and eventually left to pursue her own path, working as a scribe in a larger town where her skills with languages and numbers were highly valued. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of news and affection. Rowan stayed closer to home, apprenticing with his father and showing a natural talent for cartography. Bennett's hair began to gray at the temples, and Lira noticed the first lines appearing around his eyes. They were growing older together, their lives intertwined so completely that she could hardly remember what it had been like to exist alone. One autumn evening, when Rowan was visiting friends in the village and the way station was quiet, Bennett and Lira sat together beneath the oak tree where he had proposed all those years ago. The leaves were turning gold and red, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. "Do you remember the first night I stayed here?" Bennett asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I do. You were insufferably charming." "I was not I?" he grinned. "I thought you were going to throw me out. I considered it, but you did not, and I am very glad of that." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the way station. "We have built something good here, Lira. We have. I have never regretted it, not for a single moment. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made." Lira leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "I thought humans could never love me. I was so certain of it, but you proved me wrong. You deserve to be loved. You always have." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And I will keep choosing you every day for as long as we have." They sat together in the gathering dusk, wrapped in the warmth of shared history and the comfort of knowing they were exactly where they belonged. The way station glowed with light behind them, welcoming and warm, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear. The seasons turned, and life continued its steady rhythm. Travelers came and went, each bringing their own stories and leaving with memories of a place where they had been welcomed without judgment. The way station became a fixture in the region's collective memory, a place that represented possibility and hope. One spring morning, years after that conversation beneath the oak tree, Lira stood in the courtyard as the first travelers of the day arrived. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her posture was still strong and her gaze still steady. She no longer worked the night shift, having handed that responsibility to younger staff, but she still rose early to greet the dawn and the travelers it brought. A family approached, their wagon loaded with goods. The father looked at Lira with open curiosity but not fear. His wife smiled and their children waved shyly. Lira smiled back, unafraid, standing in the full light of morning without hesitation or shame. Bennett emerged from the way station, carrying a tray of fresh bread to set out for the guests. He caught Lira's eye and winked, and she felt the familiar warmth that his presence always brought. He was gray-haired now, moving a bit slower than he once had, but his eyes were still bright and his smile still came easily. "Good morning," Bennett called to the family. "Welcome to Fairley's Way Station. We have rooms available and a hot breakfast waiting if you are interested." The father nodded gratefully. "We would appreciate that, thank you." Lira handled the arrangements while Bennett showed them to their rooms. She worked with the ease of long practice, her movements efficient and sure. This was her place, her home, built on love and determination, and the stubborn belief that she deserved happiness just as much as anyone else. As the day progressed, more travelers arrived. A merchant bringing cloth from the coast. A young couple on their way to start a new life in the Northern Territories. A scholar researching the history of the region who had heard of the way station's reputation and wanted to see it for himself. Lira greeted them all, her manner professional but warm. She had learned over the years that most people were willing to accept her if she gave them the chance, and those who were not willing could find lodging elsewhere. In the afternoon, Rowan returned from a surveying trip, his saddlebags full of new maps and his face tanned from days in the sun. He embraced his mother, then his father, and launched into an enthusiastic description of the territory he had mapped. Bennett listened with pride, asking questions and offering suggestions, and Lira watched them both with a contentment that ran bone deep. That evening, after the guests had retired and the way station was quiet, the three of them sat together in the common room. Rowan was updating one of his maps, his hand steady and precise. Bennett was reading, his glasses perched on his nose. Lira was mending a tear in one of the guest room curtains, her needle moving in quick practice strokes. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in every way. But to Lira, it was everything. This quiet domesticity, this sense of belonging, this life built with people she loved and who loved her in return. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "Rowan," Bennett said, looking up from his book, "your mother and I have been discussing something. We wanted to talk to you about it." Rowan set down his pen, curious. "What is it?" "We are getting older," Lira said gently. "And while we are not planning to retire anytime soon, we have been thinking about the future of the way station. We want to know if you would be interested in taking it over one day." Rowan's eyes widened. "Take over the way station?" "Only if you want to," Bennett said quickly. "We do not want to pressure you. If you would rather focus on your map making, we understand. But this place means a great deal to us, and we would like to see it stay in the family." Rowan looked around the common room, his gaze taking in the sturdy furniture, the well-worn floors, the fireplace that had warmed countless travelers. "I would be honored," he said finally. "This place is home. I cannot imagine it belonging to anyone else." Lira felt her eyes prickle with tears, but they were good tears. Tears of relief and gratitude and joy. "Thank you," she said softly. They talked late into the night, making plans for the future. Rowan would take on more responsibilities gradually, learning the business side of running the way station while continuing his cartography. When the time came, the transition would be smooth, the way station passing from one generation to the next. The years continued their march. Bennett and Lira stepped back from the day-to-day operations, though they remained active in the community. They traveled occasionally, short trips to visit Ina in the town where she had settled, or to explore regions Bennett had always wanted to map, but had never had time for. Ina married a kind, thoughtful man who worked as a teacher, and they had children of their own. Rowan found love with a woman from the village, the daughter of a farmer, who had grown up hearing stories of the way station and had always admired what Lira and Bennett had built. The family tree grew, branches spreading and flourishing, and Lira marveled at it all. She thought of the young orc woman she had been, working the night shift and convinced she would always be alone. She thought of the choice Bennett had made to love her despite the judgment and the difficulty. And she thought of the life they had built together, a life that had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined. One quiet evening in late autumn, Bennett and Lira sat together beneath the oak tree one last time. They were old now, their bodies worn by years of labor and love, but their spirits were strong. The way station glowed with light behind them, alive with the sounds of family and guests and the life that pulsed through its walls. "We did well, did we not?" Bennett said, his voice soft but content. "We did." Lira took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "Better than I ever thought possible. I meant what I said all those years ago. Choosing you was the best decision I ever made. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I know." She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You chose me forever, and you kept your promise." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, painting the sky with light. The world around them was peaceful, the way station a beacon of warmth and welcome in the gathering dark. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had shared, Lira knew that she had found everything she had ever needed. She had been chosen. And she had chosen in return. And that choice, repeated day after day, year after year, had created something extraordinary. A home, a family, a legacy, and it was more than enough. It was everything.